What's the story, Morning Glory? What is the word, Hummingbird? Thank you so much for clicking on my channel and for joining me for this review of Married at First Sight UK Season 7, Episode 14, The Dinner Party. So let's get into it. So the first couple that arrives is Shanita and Jordan. And then after that, we have Duca and Whitney. They arrive second. And when they come in, they're not holding hands. They're not even like that close to one another as they walk into the dinner party. And once they're there, I think it was, I don't know who Whitney was talking to. It must have been Shanita, because I'm not sure if other couples had arrived by then. But Whitney was relaying to someone how they had to do the intimacy exercise with Charlene, the expert, and it was really awkward for her and Duca to do the intimacy exercises. So then Thomas and Adrian arrive, and soon after that, George and April come in. And I thought that as soon as Thomas saw April, he was going to give her like a really good tongue lashing. But no, he was very civil. He gave her a hug. They greeted each other, and it was very polite. And I was really surprised that he didn't like just start cussing her out. So then Gemma and Matt, one of our newest couples, they make their grand entrance. So they walk into the dinner party. Everybody looks up and they're surprised to see new faces. So as soon as Gemma gets comfortable around everybody and they've all introduced each other, she tells the ladies about the issues that her and Matt have been having. And the experts noticed that Matt, like as soon as he arrived at the dinner party, he kind of like distanced himself from Jenna. And when they're all sitting around for drinks, or to have drinks, Matt did not sit next to Jenna. Matt did not sit next to Gemma. He sat in a chair, by himself. So they noticed that Matt was trying to like physically distance himself from his wife. So Gemma tells the ladies how Matt doesn't like her off-color jokes, and they told her just to keep being herself. Now, I didn't like that advice, because there's a time and a place for everything, and you really have to read the room before you start talking about certain things, because a lot of these things can be very highly offensive to a lot of people. So if you're going to be telling off-color jokes, very sexually explicit jokes, or using a lot of foul language, I'm sorry, you have to have some type of decorum about you, and you need to read the damn room. Now, some people are down with that, and it's fine, but you don't know that. You don't know that until you get to know somebody better, and that's the mistake that she made with Matt. Before she really got to know him, she had no idea what type of a person that he was, so she thought it was perfectly normal and perfectly okay to be very overtly sexual with him and say some really sexually explicit jokes that were basically a way for her to let him know that she was sexually available. Okay, and so she didn't know what kind of guy he was or how he would receive that. I think Gemma just assumed that all men like sex and all men like things related to sex, and that regardless of how explicit her mouth was, she thought that he was going to be okay with it, and he was going to be somehow attracted to that or feel comfortable around her, to be like, oh, my wife is someone who's very sexually free because she likes to tell dirty jokes all the time, so I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that. But Matt completely shocked her and, did not respond the way that she expected. So she's relaying this to the ladies. Now, whenever Gemma would repeat the jokes that she told Matt that Matt found so offensive, whoever she was talking to would literally be shocked by how explicit her jokes were. Of course, the show beeped all of that stuff out, so I don't know what she said, but she would repeat a joke that she had told Matt, in reference of explaining to them why he got offended, and the person listening or the people listening to her would be like, they would clutch their pearls. They couldn't believe the things that she was saying and how dirty it was, how dirty her jokes were. So when they tell her, oh, just girl, be yourself, like, how is telling explicit jokes in the company of people that you really don't know, or in the presence of someone that you really don't know, how is that being yourself? Because, okay, you may have a very wicked sense of humor, which is fine, but any decent adult will know that there's a time and a place for this kind of stuff. And you just can't be like in a corporate meeting or in a room full of strangers or in a place where there's children around and just start telling dirty jokes and using explicit language, because this is just who you are and everybody else just has to accept it. So when they tell her be yourself, they're basically, to me, they're telling her continue being the rude, crass, offensive person that you are, because anybody would know that regardless of whether or not you like to tell dirty jokes, a mature adult who has an ounce of common sense would know to not just, start spewing obscenities just in front of anybody and everybody. Like, you have to read the room. You have to know your audience. But anyways, they told her to be herself and to continue doing whatever the hell she's been doing. And we see where that's gotten her. So then we kind of move on to Kwame and Kasia. They arrive and they're holding hands. And it's a completely different Kwame and Kasia. You can tell that they're very happy with one another, especially Kasia. She got what she wanted because in last week's episode, Dr. Charlene, I don't know if she's a doctor or not. I just like calling the experts doctor so that we'll know who I'm talking about. Dr. Charlene, the sex expert, came and paid them a visit, and she was able to get things, going between Kasia and Kwame. So she basically encouraged them to get out of their safety net and take that plunge and go for it, which they did. And so it seemed like they were able to consummate their marriage, I'm assuming, because that's where it looked like it was leading to. But the show could have been misleading us because Kasia came out in very sexy lingerie, then she started massaging Kwame, and then one thing led to another and the camera crew had to leave. So I'm assuming that they consummated their marriage. So they both seem extremely pleased this week. So the experts say that Gemma, this was very interesting. So, like I said before, the experts are observing the party, I'm assuming in real time. So they're noticing, everybody's behavior, their actions and whatnot. So they're observing Gemma. And the experts say that Gemma has been in the hookup space for a long time. And she equates sex with love. So Gemma, from according to what they say, Gemma is someone who's very used to having hookups, not any type of deep, meaningful relationships or long-lasting relationships. She's used to those really quick relationships that just come and go out once the sex is over, and that she equates sex with love. And I'm wondering if women like Gemma and women like Kasia, because they're plus size women, and I'm not dogging plus size women because I'm a plus size chick, but I'm wondering if Gemma, y'all, these names, if Gemma and Kasia are very sexually overt because they're plus size women, that if they feel like, because they were matched with these men sight unseen, and they're worried if their partners or their husbands will find them attractive. Okay. And so because they're not sure if their husbands find plus size women attractive, they're going to automatically lead with their sexuality. So they're thinking, either consciously or subconsciously, they're thinking, well, I might not be his type physically, but I'm going to show him that I have something he wants. And they assume that it's sex. And so they kind of come off as, I'm available, I'm ready, I'm not ashamed, I'm not going to hide my sexuality, I'm going to be free, I'm going to let you know that I'm offering it to you, I want to give it to you. And it's all in the guise of, I'm a strong, sexually independent woman. But it's really a lack of confidence because they feel like they've got nothing else to offer, because they are probably worried that their men may not be attracted to women of their size. And they're not like, morbidly obese type of women, but they are a little bit fluffier than the other women on the show. And so maybe they feel like in order to secure their men, they have to let them know that, hey, if everything else fails, we can connect sexually. You can still stick around because I'm going to give you what you want. But what they fail to realize, that these men, possibly, I don't know, are probably looking for something a little bit deeper. And it's probably a turnoff, because the men aren't thinking, oh, because you're plus size, you think I may not be attracted to you, so you're going to use sex to keep me. They're not thinking that. They're thinking, wow, she's very free with her sexuality. I'm wondering if she's this free with everybody else. And so to the men, it kind of cheapens it kind of cheapens the women in a way. It's like, okay, if she's like this with me and she barely knows me, she may be like this with every other guy that she meets, every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there. She's probably offering her body to them. That's how the men are probably interpreting it. This is just my personal opinion. I'm not an expert. I'm not a therapist. I'm not none of that. This is just my personal opinion from the observations that I've made, because I've noticed that it's Gemma and Keisha who are very overtly sexual, and they're the only two plus size women on this cast, whereas the other women are not like that. Moving on. So this is what the experts have noticed about Gemma, that she's probably not used to a deep, meaningful relationship or a long-lasting relationship, so she doesn't know what to do. So she's treating Matt, who is supposed to be her husband, that she's supposed to be married to forever, she's treating him like the way she would treat like some guy that she hooks up with at the bar. So moving on from there, April tells Whitney how George is extremely jealous and insecure. And I thought this was a very interesting conversation. So April and Whitney are having a private conversation in the middle of this crowd. And April says to Whitney, do you see that cushion over there? If I'm to look at that cushion and George saw me, he would automatically get jealous and be like, why are you looking at that cushion? His insecurity and his jealousy is like on a level 10. And she doesn't know what to do. She's like, as soon as she reassures him that she doesn't want to be with anybody else, that she wants to be with him, it seems like things are better, but then something will happen and, his jealousy and insecurities get woken back up again. And for him to be so jealous that if she looks at another guy just in passing, he kind of goes berserk, then that's a red flag. This is a situation where George may need therapy. And if you don't have the patience to deal with him going to therapy, then maybe this is not the marriage for you. Because if he's that jealous and that insecure, then there's probably an issue, and he needs therapy because of the fact that he's been cheated on and he's been betrayed in the past. He probably has a lot of emotions that he has not dealt with, and it's coming off as insecurity and jealousy. Okay, so then Sophie and Jonathan enter, and when they enter, everybody was just like really amazed by Sophie, how pretty she was, her dress was nice, everything about her was really pretty. Thomas made it a point to go up to her directly and tell her that, she's probably one of the most beautiful women he's ever seen. Now, Sophie is a pretty girl to me. Is she the most beautiful that I've ever seen? Far from it. She's a decent looking chick, but her whole entire package and the way she carries herself and just her hair, her makeup, her dress, everything was just very well put together. Moving on from there. So Gemma wants to be physically close to Matt at this party, and Matt keeps kind of like pushing her away and letting her know that he's got boundaries and that she needs to respect his boundaries. This is what he's telling his wife at a dinner party. And so the experts say that Gemma only knows to offer her body and to offer sex. That's all she knows. And that sex is her love language. And so when she's being rejected in that way, she doesn't know what to do with herself. She's completely lost because she feels like she can always rely on her sexuality to get a man, to keep a man interested. And so when they're rejecting that part of her, she feels like she's got nothing else to offer. And I think it comes from insecurity about her size. I really do think it comes from that, because it's kind of like, well, I can't impress him with my looks. I can't impress him with my intelligence or my conversations. I'm going to use my body to it's just, to me, it's very jacked up. So Thomas tells Sophie that, okay, we talked about that, how he told Sophie she's one of the most beautiful women that he's ever seen. Gemma then has a conversation with Zoe and how her husband doesn't want to get close to her and keeping her at arm's length. So she pours her heart out to Zoe. I think she was even getting emotional when she was talking to Zoe. And Zoe, even though she doesn't know this woman, didn't know what to do with all of these emotions that were coming out of Gemma, she did the best that she could to comfort her. So now it's time for dinner. Everybody sits down for dinner. So Whitney and Duca, they tell Thomas that they're doing well, but they look very tense. They talk about how they're doing fine, especially Duca. He kept on telling everybody that him and Whitney are doing great, they're doing fine, but it didn't look like it from his face and from her face. It looked like there was tension between them. So then they're having a conversation about the highs and lows of their relationships so far. Gemma compliments, so Gemma and Matt, obviously they're sitting next to each other at the dinner table, and Gemma begins to compliment Matt, complimenting him on his looks and saying that I really enjoy enjoy being in your company. She tells him this. I really enjoy being in your company. She says that she enjoys being around him. And then she kind of like forcefully pulls him in for a hug. And he kind of like has no choice but to hug her because she was just kind of like pulling him towards her, but you can tell that he was uncomfortable, right? And her constantly complimenting him, you can tell that she's trying to warm him up to her because he's been so cold. So you feel like, her constantly complimenting him and laying it on really thick, and it came off so desperate, and I wanted her to stop. And I'm like, Gemma, do you know that there's a world out there where men actually chase women, and men are actually the more aggressor? They're more of the aggressive between the two. They pursue the women that they want to be with. Do you know that that exists out there, and that you should probably wait for a man that is willing to chase you and wanting to chase you instead of you chasing someone who doesn't want to be caught? So, it was just embarrassing and cringy to see her fawning all over him, pulling him in for this really uncomfortable hug. It was just very uncomfortable. So moving on from that whole situation, now let's get into the gossip. So April and Thomas have a conversation about the whole situation with Shanita, because April had told Shanita that Thomas was saying negative things about her behind her back, right? So this got back to Thomas, and Thomas got really upset last week because he felt like he was being lied on. So April and Thomas, they have a conversation, and they realize that the culprit was Jess from PJ and Jess. And Jess is no longer on the show. Her and PJ broke up, so they ended their time on the show. So what they concluded is that Jess told April and she told Thomas that the other had said something bad about Shanita. And so this is when April went to Shanita and said, I heard that Thomas was saying bad things about you. And allegedly she had heard this from Jess. And so they go and they tell Shanita, they confront Shanita with this information. And Shanita was like, well, how does Jess's name get into this? And unless they edited out, they never showed April and Thomas explaining to Shanita that Jess was accusing the other of talking about Shanita when neither one of them were talking about her. They never explained that to Shanita. They were just like, oh, we figured it out. It was Jess. And they kind of like left it at that. And so Shanita was like, oh, what does Jess have to do with this? And so then, because nobody was explaining anything to Shanita was like, you know what? I believe that both of y'all were talking about me. And so Adrian was like, we weren't talking about you, or whatever he said. And then Shanita said, well, the story keeps changing. Y'all keep telling me different versions. And so then Thomas says, my version has never changed. I've always maintained my innocence, that I'm not lying to you, and I wasn't talking about you. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know if April and Thomas were talking about Shanita to Jess, and then Jess, spilled the beans on both of them, or if Jess completely made it up and neither one of them were talking about Shanita, and Jess just concocted this whole entire lie for whatever reason. I don't know. None of this makes any sense to me. So it seems like there's still some unresolved issues amongst these three people. And because Thomas is beginning to flare up, he's beginning to get angry and loud, Adrian has to try to calm him down. So Adrian was able to pull Thomas away from the group, sit down with him and try to calm him down and have a conversation with him. Now, what I like to see was that even though Thomas was really, really upset, he was listening to Adrian and he took his advice and he was able to calm down a little bit. Moving on from there. So, Sophie and Jonathan, they're talking about their relationship and how they're getting along so well. Their wedding was great. Their honeymoon was better. Sophie keeps talking about how she feels very safe when she's in Jonathan's presence. And so they're just singing each other's praises. Moving on from there. So Gemma and Matt have a conversation. So Gemma jokes about that what they need. This is at the dinner table with everybody else. Okay. So Gemma tells Matt that what they really need to get their relationship on the right track is like a good romp in bed. But of course she doesn't say romp. She uses more colorful language. And so Matt says to her, so you're telling me that our whole entire relationship hinges on that? And so she says, no, it doesn't, but she feels like he doesn't like her. And Matt said something to the effect of, well, here we go again, you speaking for me. And so she says, I don't know where I stand with you. And Matt says, well, that's your problem. I can't do anything about that. Well, you can kind of reassure her how you feel about her. Like tell her, well, this is where you stand with me. That's what you can do. As her partner, you can be like, well, this is where you stand. This is how it is. I don't feel what you want me to feel, or I do like you, or I like you, but, or whatever. Give her an explanation of how you're feeling and what you're going through, instead of just like, oh, well, that's your problem if you don't know where you stand. No, it's your problem because you haven't told her. So Gemma says, do you like me or do you fancy me at all? And Matt says, are you talking about at this moment when you're putting all this pressure on me? And so Gemma says, okay, you're just making up excuses. And so Matt, he gets upset and he gets up and he's beginning to walk away from the table. But it wasn't before him and Gemma had an exchange of words, and she cussed him out and told him to F off. So now our boy Matt is outside trying to calm down, fuming, and George goes out there and they have a conversation, and Matt explains to George what he's been going through with Gemma, how she's, her explicit jokes and the pressure that she's been putting on him to sleep with her and all this and that, and that's just not his style. He's not used to all of that, and it's taken a toll on him. So George had a better understanding of why Matt acted the way he did with her at the dinner table. So then they go back inside and George sees that April is visibly upset, like she's about to cry. So he sits down next to her and he's asking her what's wrong, and she doesn't say. And then he asks her, does that have something to do with me? And she says no. So I'm only assuming that it's got something to do with the whole Shanita and Jordan thing, but she never really explained what happened or why she was feeling that way. And so then Matt, who was sitting across from George, complimented George by saying, you know what, George is a really stand-up guy, because when I was out there fuming, he came out to talk to me, have a conversation with me, and nobody else did. So I really admire this guy. And so April tells George, I keep telling you that everybody loves you, and that, everybody loves you, they care about you, they think the world of you, but you just don't believe it. And, it's the truth. You are a really great guy. You're an amazing guy. And I need you to understand that. I need you to realize that. And so, George feels a little bit better. Even April feels a little bit better. And then we see that Whitney and Matt are having a very intense conversation amongst the two of them. And Duca notices, and I think even Gemma noticed, like, okay, what's going on here? Because it seems like they were talking to each other more than they were talking to their respective spouses. So I don't know what the show is trying to make us think with this whole Matt and Whitney situation, but I thought that was kind of interesting. But it's probably not going to go anywhere. Anyways, that is the end of my review. I loved how the experts analyzed Gemma. We all know a Gemma. Maybe some of us are a Gemma, where you feel like the only way that you can connect with a man is by letting him know that you are ready and willing, and you think that that's what it's gonna take to make him stick around, and it's going to do the exact opposite. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. On your way out, don't forget to rate the video. If you like this content, go ahead and subscribe, and I will definitely talk to you later. Bye.